digital identity stuff does seem to me like a more concrete case where it's kind of like infrastructure for the 21st or 22nd centuries, where it's very difficult to imagine a world in the future where we're not more integrated into the internet. And people talk about IoT and various different things, and cars that are connected up to the internet and all this kind of stuff. But it's clear that the internet will go through some kind of transformation where our real identities are much more coupled with the things that we do online. And there will be need for being able to verify who you are and what permissions you have in society or whatever.
I really see it as worthwhile considering the internet as as this domain of information, what I called a revolution in gossip, right? And this other stuff, a revolution in power. These are completely different languages, completely different domains, completely separate.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would just be very skeptical that so even with Bitcoin, right? It's like it promised to be this democratic thing where everyone now had access to money that wasn't controlled by government and all this stuff. And then what ends up happening is you have 1,000 people control half of all Bitcoin or something, was the most recent statistics that I read.
Yeah, I mean, I was never interested in Bitcoin remotely. It's just cash.
But like there was an article this week that was Bitcoin is none of the things that it promised to be. So it's supposed to be decentralized. It's not really decentralized because all of the mining is done by a relatively small group of people. Most cryptocurrencies seem to suffer from that problem where it's very difficult to incentivize.
I wouldn't say most.
Or many, I think.
But people are looking backwards 7 years at a very early. I mean, imagine making this stuff up back then. I mean, I saw like the very early experiments and everything because I was really interested in. I was making my own kind of weird digital currencies at that time. So, when this, you just make it up and you guess what's going to happen to the system over the next 20 years, right? And so there was there was an interesting experiment, and it didn't quite turn out how, there's it had never been done before. So looking at that and saying, hey, they said it was going to be decentralized and it isn't, is like just saying, I don't know, my first painting was shit. I mean, so what? And now a lot has been learned from that. And there are, if you've got a language and a set of tools, and you can create amazing structures. You can create them centralized, decentralized. You can, radically decentralized. You can do what you want with this stuff. And just looking at Bitcoin, or even just looking at what people understand as Ethereum now, isn't looking at the it's like looking at the very first internet and seeing a bit of text and it coming over slowly and saying, oh, wow, they said it was going to be amazing. And in fact, you have to wait for ages for it, because just like with the internet, a whole domain of gossip opened up. In this, you're looking at the very first steps in opening up power. Yeah. Right. And, like when I try and describe what I'm absolutely certain I've been seeing it happen just like I saw the internet happen. What will happen to votes and money, let's say if you look back from 50 years' time, something like that, we'll have the same impression about voting or using a bank and bank accounts and these spreadsheets. We'll have the same impression that we currently now have about Morse code.
Okay.
It was like did it. I mean, it was kind of cool, and you could send stuff over, and you could communicate. But now we use video. It looks and feels entirely different, right? And we use the internet. We won't be using numbers like we did. We won't be having spreadsheets like we did. We won't even think of votes and money. There'll be a sort of flow of value that we will be using visualization and all sorts of ways to interact with our supermarket and our business and our employment and our government. And that is just because the current stuff we call votes and money is medieval technology. Yeah. I mean, that's
really interesting. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that gets made a lot is at the moment, if you look at blockchains and things, they have all these weird hash signatures and lots of weird strings of numbers and letters, and it doesn't really make sense. But that's just because we're at a relatively immature stage where once all of this stuff is actually mature, no one's ever going to need to know what their specific address is on Ethereum, because it will all just be, it'll have a UI in front of it. It will have
But what counts is who designs that UI and how transparent it is, because with the UI and with code, you can fool everyone. You know, and if this genuinely is now the future expression of power, which is what I'm saying it is, right? And that's democratic power and financial power, then it's absolutely essential that that source code is open and the design is open, and that we can create our own stuff out of it and test it and look at it and examine it, because it is the creation and the ability to create those interfaces and those social arrangements, which is the community-based and individual-based, and I would emphasize community as well, small community. It is their future political power relations with other larger groups, multinationals, governments, or what have you. And just putting a nice interface on some contracts with an algorithm that no one understands would be a disaster.
Right.
And that's why I'm interested in domain-specific languages, legal languages, which means these smart contracts should be legible to a 10-year-old.
Yeah, that's going to be very difficult given how complex modern law is. Even if you try and read some law, it's very difficult to understand a lot of it unless you have the training.
You need to flip that, right? That's a lawyer or someone saying, look at this huge, like these 100 volumes of stuff, there's no way that you can do that.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I laugh at that. I say, look at Python code or Perl code for a 3D rendering. That's complicated. Your legal stuff is kids play, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Right? In terms of complexity, right? But that's not the point. I mean, the real point is what you can do with the domain-specific language, right? And a DSL is a simplification for a current domain that anyone vaguely competent in that domain can use. And you can have millions of the things. So if you want to do a DSL for your housing association, then yes, your grandmother can use it and a 10-year-old can use it, and it works well for that. And it doesn't work for all cases, but 95% of them. If you want some custom code made, you go to the equivalent of a lawyer and you get something special and new made, but that should be open source, and if someone else wants that, they can fork it.